as Rob said, I'm happy to be back. It's been 2008 since I was here. I think I came for LCA a couple of times and had a great time. So before I get started, I want to get an idea of who all of you are and how you work a little bit. So first, who in the room is using Puppet right now? Right? Who's brand new to Puppet? Not quite half, maybe a third. Who's using some other configuration management tool, something else in the space? Who's still using shell scripts and proud? All right. Who's still using shell scripts and embarrassed? All right. Great. Who here? Have any of you written your own automation tools that you're still using in your infrastructure? I was going to say there's got to be at least a couple, right? All right. 3 or 4.
Can you pop out the sound a bit, please?
I cannot. Maybe somebody else can. I could try to yell. I don't know if that'll work. We have a sound person who can hopefully level the sound. Yeah. I'll try to be louder. My throat seems to be catching up to me with lots of international trips and talking all week. So we'll see if it works. She's going to try to get the sound up. So mostly, I think we're at a really interesting time. I think the market is going through a lot of interesting changes, and the changes, the interesting trends I think are a big part of why you're here today, and a big part of why everyone is trying so hard to do different things. And some of the things are, there's an opportunity out there, and people look at that and they go, wow, that's cool. And some of it is, seriously, you're going to have to change. And if you don't make change, you're going to get crushed. I think first and foremost, being a sysadmin in a lot of ways kind of sucks. My definition of an admin is somebody who nobody notices you until you don't do your job correctly, right? I mean, your CEO always wonders, seriously, what do you do? Until something goes wrong, and then he goes, you've screwed everything up. Why are you even here? But if you do perfectly, then they kind of like, well, I can just, stop paying you because obviously I don't need you. In reality, though, the work of sysadmin is often very difficult, very tedious. Studies show sysadmins get interrupted on average every 15 minutes. And different studies show that it takes about 30 minutes to recover fully from being interrupted, right? So if you're trying to write some code, or you're trying to do something that involves a decent bit of thinking, you get a ticket in the middle, somebody walks up right behind you and asks you for help. In general, it takes you a long time to recover from that. So sysadmins learn a practice more of firefighting rather than of kind of doing long-term, not even necessarily strategic work, but deeper work. And that itself is pretty hard, right? And the business wants you to do these big strategic projects, but the reality of your life is you just don't have time to do it. And the work we do, the technology we do provide, the things that we're asked to do on a daily basis are more and more critical. When I was first, oh there we go, that helps a little bit. When I was first coming up as a sysadmin in the late 90s, you had 2-day maintenance windows. If it took you a couple of days to recover a service, that wasn't so bad. People talked about, they talked about 5 nines of uptime as though it was mythical, as opposed to as though it was a failure. And now what you're seeing is the outsourcing that happened in those days. In those days, people would they would say, well, we're not really a technology company, we're a media company, or we're a retail company. And so I'll take the technology and I'll make it somebody else's problem, and they'll give me a promise to make it cheap, and that's all I really care about technology. And what they realize pretty quickly is they care a lot more about things besides cost. So what we're seeing is companies rolling that outsourced technology back in. They're deciding that even though I'm a media company or a bank or a retail company, actually technology has to be one of the things that I'm best in the world at. It has to be a competitive advantage, because if I'm not great at it, then my competition is crushing me. It's not just about it being important, though. You have to be faster and you have to be focused. Again, back when I first started, almost every company was a little bit good at everything, right? You had to manage your own email, you had to manage your own web services, you had to manage your own CRM, you had to manage every piece of what you did. You had a technology team devoted to that piece, or maybe you didn't have a team devoted, and so it was even worse off. And now you have to, as a company, you have to find a way to move very, very quickly. And the only way you can switch from deploying once a year or once a quarter to deploying once an hour, the only way you can do that is finding a way to focus on speed, to focus on agility. And this is a very different reality from what most companies are built around, right? Most companies, they focus technology on, well, we've got to be secure, we've got to be stable, and everything else is kind of a nice to have. Well, it's no longer nice to have. You still have to be secure, and security is obviously harder than it's ever been. You still have to be stable. But you've got to do those things while finding a way to move dramatically more quickly than you used to move. DevOps is definitely affecting a lot of, it's driving a lot of the conversation. The tradition of IT and development is that they don't necessarily hate each other, but they definitely, they wear different colors and they go to different bars in the evening. And DevOps has been a trend over the last 5 years. It's actually a 5-year anniversary conference was just in Ghent. And a big part of the focus in DevOps is how do we take the goals of IT, the goals of technology, and align it better with the business. Instead of saying, look, we can't do that because it would make us less secure, or we can't do that because I don't have to do that. It's how do you find a way to say yes? How do you find a way to do not what you need, but what the company needs, what the organization needs, and what your operations teams need? And we surveyed about 9,200 people this year to produce a DevOps report, and we saw a lot of really good data that pointed to the practices that we think of as aligning with DevOps, they seem to have a very good result in organizations moving more quickly, organizations having a better result. And then lastly, obviously, we've been talking about the cloud for a very long time, and I think in general, the way we talk about the cloud is pretty useless because we lump all these things that aren't very related to each other into one big bucket. And I guess the bucket's upside down so it can hold the cloud around, I don't know. And obviously, and actually Australia uses, much larger companies use Amazon Web Services here in Australia than in the US. I don't think I know a single bank in the US who's using AWS heavily, whereas in Australia, I think every bank I've met with this week has already got a significant investment in AWS, which is pretty surprising to me. But AWS is one aspect of the cloud, right? Not needing to own nearly as many, in some cases, any physical servers. That's one kind of cloud behavior, and API-driven infrastructure is a big deal, and it means a lot. But it's very, very different from SaaS, right? So if you've got software as a service, if you're using Salesforce, if you're using Workday, if you're using things like that, then that's also great, but it's very different from infrastructure as a service. And I think in a lot of ways, SaaS is more interesting because, AWS is a better hosting service, and hosting is great, hosting is critical, you do need your servers, but it's rare that the ability to have servers is really going to make the difference between you being world-class and you not being world-class. People who are amazing with Amazon are probably going to be amazing with a typical hosting company. It's just going to take a little more work. The thing that I think is interesting, that's really driving the biggest changes that I see in our customer base, is software as a service. Because it used to be, again, you had this broad base. You had to be a little bit good at everything in the old days. But if you can take a lot of the things that aren't your core competency, that aren't going to be the difference between success or failure for you as an individual, for your organization, and you can outsource them not at a basic level, but at a service level and say, I just literally don't have to think about that anymore. I don't have to have a team of 5 people who knows what the technology stack is. I don't have to worry about uptime. And frankly, it's not that it's always going to be up, but when it isn't up, I'm not the one who gets paged anymore, which is pretty sweet. When you can do that, then it allows you as an organization to focus much more. And that focus means you kind of take that horizontal spread and you turn it on its end and you become much deeper as an organization and much deeper as an individual. So companies who don't have the money or the time or really the desire to hire hundreds or thousands of engineers to focus on their tech stack, they don't need to because most of their tech stack is somewhere else, right? They get to focus a lot more on what they do. We also see this trend towards what people are calling immutable infrastructure. So rather than having servers that stick around for 3 years or 5 years, people are doing, and again, this is a trend, not a major adoption yet, but people are they deploy, they build up an AMI or a container, deploy that into production. Rather than updating that machine when a new release comes out, they deploy the new version in production right next to it, turn off the old one. And so you see server lifetimes go from years to, in some cases, minutes. And certainly much more commonly you'll see it in hours. And this is really interesting because it changes how you think about your tool chain, it changes how you think about your practices, and you really have to re-architect your entire application from the ground up and then rebuild all your tools and processes around it. And so as you look to this change, we're not seeing 100% of very many people's workloads move to this, but you certainly see some percentage of people looking for some portion of their workloads to do this. And it's a very different tool set, it's a very different way of thinking about it. And the last one is kind of my favorite. You see competition, right? It used to be that if IT said, you know what, I'm not going to do that for you, I'm going to I'm going to sit here and, we're not going to support the platform you want, we're not going to upgrade the software, we're not going to worry about it because we care more about security and stability than, whether the developers are happy. That worked for a long time, but now when you say no, you come back in 6 months and the developers have deployed 1,000 machines in production on AWS and you have no idea, and you've got a $200,000 bill. And the weirdest thing is your customers are happier for a little while until all their data gets stolen or something like that. So there's this kind of competition where you have to step up or you get routed around. And this is changing all of our jobs, right? It's changing how, it's changing the extent to which we get to be in control of our own destinies. And I think this is pretty interesting. This isn't vodka, by the way. It's gin. So that's what we're here to do. We're here to help you through these trends, and we're here to, I think of us as the arms dealers in all these conversations. We're not necessarily driving it, but we're kind of handing both sides all the weapons. Fundamentally, we're here to help you automate your infrastructure. I want to take the things you do, I want to take the problems you have, and I want to make them faster. Not the problems, I want to make the solutions to the problems faster, sorry. We're here to help you make rapid, repeatable changes, and the goal in what we do is I want to take a lot of the kind of boring, tedious work that you spend way too much of your time doing. I want to automate that out of the way. I want to take the lack of consistency that drives a lot of the outages you see, a lot of the interruptions you see. Let's bring a huge amount of reliability and a huge amount of consistency to the work you do, so that rather than spending your whole life being interrupted, rather than spending all of your time handling alerts, you can spend your time focusing for long periods of time on these bigger problems, on these more interesting issues. People often talk about automation like, the goal is to make me have less work to do, right? The goal is to make it so that I'm put out of a job or something. But if you look at most organizations, you look at most sysadmins, your challenge is not, wow, I can barely do 100% of my job every week, and when I get to Friday at 4, sometimes I have to leave early because there's just nothing left to do, right? That's not the problem. The problem is you're doing 3% of the work you're supposed to do, or you're spending so much of your time doing the really kind of the urgent work that you don't get to do any of the important work. So the goal of automation is to help get rid of all that urgent but not very important work, get rid of all the things that detract from the time you have, and make it so you can get maybe closer to 100% of your job. I mean, you're never going to get quite all of it done. In general, people start using Puppet at the core infrastructure layer. They use it to kind of make the operating system, make all of the core pieces go away. I don't want to think about whether all my machines have SSH configured correctly. I don't want to think about whether the latest version of SSL is vulnerable, or the version that I'm running is the vulnerable one or not. Sorry, the vulnerable 17 or not. I just don't want to think about that, right? I want it to all go away. And when I say go install the software, I don't want to have to say go install the software, go install the software. I just want to say it one time and have it happen automatically across my entire infrastructure. The things that you get out of widely using automation, first and foremost, you are just much, much faster, right? Instead of it taking days, weeks, months, quarters to get the latest version of something out there, to go from, hey, it's ready to be in production to it's actually running in production, you can do it in minutes, you can do it in hours, you can do it as fast as your organization in many cases will let you. You get a lot more productivity, right? It's one thing to say, hey, I can build this one machine and it takes me a certain amount of time, but it's another thing to say I can build 2,000 machines in 10 minutes or in 30 minutes. That kind of productivity matters a lot. It means you're that much more valuable, right? It means you get that much more done. And then lastly, you understand more about what's going on in your infrastructure than you ever have before. The gold standard in the year 2000 was you had a person whose job was to walk around with a clipboard in your data center and write down UPC symbols and things like that. And that never worked, but hey, well, what else do you expect? In this world, with Puppet, you can get a complete, yes, you know all the servers you're managing, yes, you know everything about those servers you find remotely interesting, but you also know every resource you're managing in every one of those machines. You know all the details of how that resource is supposed to be configured. You know every change that's ever happened to those resources. And so you know things like, hey, is my system actually configured correctly right now? If I'm seeing an outage, is it an outage because I've got it misconfigured, or is it an outage for some other reason? Puppet is fundamentally an operations tool. It's built for sysadmins. I was a sysadmin before I started Puppet Labs, and I didn't want to build something for people who wanted to do something else. I wanted to build a better tool for you, right? I wanted to build a better tool for the problem of maintaining and building operations. But the reality is the developers had a ton of great software out there. They had a ton of great practices that I thought we could get a lot of benefit from appropriating, maybe is the right way to say it. And so the act of using Puppet is very much like iterative development. You go through this, you don't go to production and begin doing work right away, right? You begin on your laptop, on your desktop. You go through the development period there. You define how you want your infrastructure to look. I want these packages over here. I want these services running here. I want them to be all related in this way. I want the configurations to look like this. Once you've got what you think is the right configuration, you go through some sort of testing. And that testing might be as simple as, I run Puppet in simulation mode on 1 or 2 machines. It might be as complex as, I'm going to use Puppet, I'm going to use Jenkins, I'm going to use Beaker to build a complete test environment. I'm going to build the virtual machines, I'm going to build the monitoring for it, I'm going to make sure the service comes all the way up. And only when all of that passes green do I then go into the environment. And I talked to a customer this week who's got Puppet and a bunch of other tooling built up, so that they've got a 5-stage pipeline. And if everything in all those pipelines is green, the new releases get promoted automatically into production. That's a lot of testing that you can do that you could never have done without a fully automated infrastructure. And then, obviously, once you're comfortable, once you're ready for once you believe the configurations you built are sufficient, then you roll that into production and you say, okay, yes, go make that. So, unless you look at the system and say, did that work, right? Did it do what I thought it was going to do? Did it make the changes I expected? And hey, is the system actually still working? So Puppet is built around a very simple language. And how many here are using Nagios? Is Nagios still all around? If you're not using Nagios, what else do you use?
Zabbix.
Zabbix?
Yeah.
All right. So the language that Puppet's configuration language most resembles is Nagios' configuration file format. And it's embarrassing, I agree, but it was somewhat intentional in that the goal of Puppet was to look more like a configuration file than a programming language. The goal was to talk about the state you want the system to be in and not to worry about what state it was right now. If you were to write this in the form of a shell script, every single one of these resources would have to be bracketed with, if package is currently not installed, then install it. If file is currently not this case, then make it this case. If the service is currently not running, then make it run. With Puppet, you just say, hey, go look like this. And Puppet's job is to figure out, does it already look like this? Is the package already installed? Is it already the latest version? Is the file already in place? Is it the correct content? Is the service already running? If it is running, have I made any changes to the package and service beforehand? In which case, I should restart the service because we want to make sure it's not just running, but it's running the latest code against the latest configuration. This is a very simple, obviously this is a simplistic example. If I could have picked a more complicated, like OpenStack example, but the font would be, not as readable. 1-point font, I think, on this projector. But the thing about having such a simple language is you can hand it to almost anybody and understand it, right? You can hand it to your auditors and say, here's how my configurations say my infrastructure should be built. Here are the logs showing my infrastructure is actually built this way, right? Showing that I've run Puppet on all my machines and I'm getting no failures. And the auditors don't have to look at your actual infrastructure because they can trust Puppet, they can read the code, and they can understand the alerts. That's pretty powerful. Here's an example of a similar problem, but in the Windows world, where your goal is, I want to build out an IIS server. We've actually been talking to a lot of people this week who are running Windows a lot more than I expected, I guess. And again, it's a pretty understandable problem. You don't have to spend a lot of time trying to understand what's going on here. It's not that complex. And the idea behind it is you can build this code and make it so it's a little tunable. If you've got different ways of using SSH or different ways of using NTP, it's not write it all one time and then, oh wow, I want to use it differently in different places. What do I do? Well, you build it so that as your needs change, it's easy to use it slightly differently. These are all examples of modules you can find in our Forge. We've got almost 3,000 modules on the Forge right now, and these modules vary from something somebody posted a long time ago and haven't updated in 2 years to highly maintained, well-supported, very, very functional modules that we actually support within our commercial product. And the idea behind these modules is, my ultimate goal with the Forge is to get to the point where about 80% of the problems that you encounter in your infrastructure, you can solve with modules that you can run unmodified from the Forge. Because The reality is your infrastructure, the tools you use, you are not a unique and beautiful snowflake, right? Most of what you do is relying on commodity hardware, commodity software. It makes sense to, as much as possible, rely on configurations, rely on management that you can download and use unmodified. Within your infrastructure, when Puppet runs, by default, Puppet runs every half an hour. You have complete control of this. If you only want it to run once a week or you want it to run every 5 minutes, you're in charge. But when Puppet runs, every node goes through this process of communicating to the server. And step one is updating itself, making sure it's got all the latest plugins and things like that. But it sends to the server a complete list of everything it knows about itself. Its IP address, its hosting, its kernel revision, its operating system, everything, and this is all pluggable, so if you want to discover other things, if you really care about the storage drivers, if you really care about physical location, you can determine that from the IP space, then you can discover all that information, send it up to the server, and then that information is used to create what we call the catalog. And the catalog is this complete list of all the resources that you're managing and how they're all related to each other. All this data, and then Puppet takes that catalog, runs it locally and says, hey, go make sure you look like this, generates a report, sends that report back up to the server. So now you've got all the information about the server, you've got the complete configuration for each server, and you've got a complete report describing what happened on each server. This is a huge amount of data. All that data we store in PuppyDB. So if you want to get access to this data, you want to know, hey, what's happened to this machine, or how many machines have this version of Ruby on, or how many machines am I managing this service on, you can get that information really, really quickly. And we've built a lot of our new technology and a lot of our new applications we're building on PuppetDB because it makes that much of a difference. We've also got a tool called mCollective that is useful for essentially running tasks across a wide portion of your infrastructure. It does real-time discovery. If you say, look, I want to go restart Apache on all the machines that are on all my web servers. I want to find all the production web servers in Sydney and check the version of Apache on them. With mCollective, you can do this really easily because it does real-time discovery against your existing infrastructure and then gives you the ability to perform operations against those machines. It's all built on a message bus, and it's very, very powerful. For those who are using Puppet today, we've also been investing heavily in not so much the next generation of functionality, but taking the code and the platform of Puppet as it's existed for a long time and trying to upgrade it, trying to make sure that it's running against the most modern technology we can. So on the client side, we're in the process of rewriting a huge portion of, in the long term, it'll be everything that runs on the client will be rewritten in something like C++. So then when the next version of Puppet comes out, Puppet 4 should be out in the near future. When Puppet 4 ships, it'll use a version of Factor written in C++ instead of the version right now that's written in Ruby. And this is great for a bunch of reasons. One is it's between 2 and 10 times faster. So that's always good. It's easier to maintain, it's easier to install, it's just easier to do a lot of things. And anybody who's had to maintain a Ruby in production knows there are a lot of good reasons to not use Ruby anymore. On the server side, we're replacing the Ruby front end and the Ruby server framework with framework enclosure, and we're running all of our services in the JVM under JRuby now. And that makes it so you have a lot greater reliability. On the server side, it's kind of, you're less worried about maintaining the installation, and you're more worried about how can I make sure that it's resilient? How can I make sure if it begins to have too much load that it doesn't just catch on fire, but it actually degrades gracefully? Those begin to be your concerns. And so the new Puppet server we've built is much more focused on resilience, reliability, and maintainability. And that's available in open source today, and you can use it right now, although I think the version number is 0.3, so listen to the versions and don't assume we're making, you should assume we're not making any promises about that service at this point. We've also got a lot of other interesting tools, and there's probably a slide missing based on how many conversations I've had about it today or this week. So Razor's a physical provisioning tool we built. We built it in partnership with EMC because we had a lot of customers who wanted physical provisioning to feel like provisioning on Amazon. They didn't want it to feel like Jumpstart or Kickstart, right? They wanted it to be fast, they wanted it to be dynamic, they wanted it to be rules-based, and they wanted it to be directly tied into their configuration management infrastructure. So Razor's really built around the fastest, easiest way, and the most powerful way to build out new physical infrastructure. Because there are already all these great tools for building out virtual machines, for building out containers. How do you tie that? How do you at some point, it can't be turtles all the way down. You've got to go to silicon somewhere. Someone somewhere has to actually build a machine. And Razor is really about the easiest way to do that and the best way to tie that into the rest of your work. We've also got Hira. Okay, the mic got turned up again. You're welcome. So Hira is useful for building your modules in a more reusable way. So a lot of your modules, you deploy them the same everywhere, so you don't need to say things like, well, I use this 10 dot network for my infrastructure because everyone uses that. So how do you extract out things like IP address, IP spaces, and domains, so that on the one hand, you don't have to repeat them all the time, but on the other hand, they aren't built into your module, so you can actually publish them on the Forge, or you can use one on the Forge. And Hira is a way of storing that data apart from your modules to give you kind of the best combination of reusability. R10K is also a really powerful tool. So there are a bunch of other tools in this space that, things like Librarian, that I think was actually built by Tim Sharp, who might be here today. So other tools that people have been using for how do I get the modules that I want to run on the machine, on the masters, so I can maintain, so I can run the most recent code. When I do a Puppet deployment, what does that look like? How do I do it? How do I tie these things together? And R10K is the tool that we're recommending. We're in the process of putting it into Puppet Enterprise so that part of it is so you can rely on it, so there's a special recommended version that you use in all cases, and part of it is so that we can get R10K from it's interesting, it works really well, to kind of fill out the rest of the use cases and make sure it works a lot better. So, but if you're struggling with how do I deploy my Puppet code in the first place today, you should definitely be looking at R10K as a means of doing that. So this is roughly what a typical open source installation looks like. And one tool I don't have a slide for, but should mention, is Beaker. Beaker is the new test framework for testing Puppet. So if you're writing code, I don't care what kind of code, you should be writing tests for your code. You should be caring about how do you confirm that your code is doing the things that you expected it to do. And if you're using Ruby, you're probably using RSpec to test your code. If you're using Puppet, probably also using RSpec actually. But Beaker is a tool you can use for doing more acceptance testing when you want to figure out, it's one thing to say, yes, the code seems to be doing this. It's another thing to say, when I run Puppet on this machine, it actually does the stuff that I expected it to do. So as you look at building out that test pipeline of how do I get code from my keyboard into production, look at Beaker along with a bunch of other tools like RSpec to figure out how it works. So we as a company, though, so this is walking through a lot of the open source technology we provide, and these things are all individually very powerful. They're all, I think, relatively good software. But we're a software company overall. We try to we do make the majority of our software, of our money, selling software. And our goal is to build overall the best operations tools we can for you. And I think it's very selfish of them, but all of my engineers actually want to get paid. So our challenge is how do we, on the one hand, provide as great open source technology as we can, so all of you can do as much as possible, and we don't know what you're going to do with all these things. How can we make our software as widely available as we can, while at the same time building a great software business? And Puppet Enterprise is our core product. It's what we sell to all of our customers. That's the definition of a customer for us, is you buy our software from us. And the way that Puppet Enterprise works is we've got all the core technology we were talking about today. All or nearly all of that is built into the platform. And then we've got these additional applications that are built on top of it. So one of those applications is our new Node Manager. And the Node Manager is a rules-based classifier. And the idea behind this classifier is you shouldn't care about your individual nodes, right? Many of you probably heard you should think of your servers as cattle, not pets. You shouldn't have an emotional relationship with your infrastructure. So how do you get to the point where when a new server pops up, you don't have to interact with it at all, right? It just goes to the machine and says, oh, well, I'm a Red Hat box. I guess I should have this policy applied. Oh, I'm in this data center. I guess I should have this security policy applied. So how do you get to the point where all of your machines do all the right things without you having to interact with them or care about them at all? You turn up 1,000 machines, you don't want to go in and say, and then that machine's a Red Hat server, and then that machine's a Red Hat server, right? It doesn't matter. So this rules-based classifier is about allowing you to step out of the way and allowing the infrastructure to figure out how it should build and manage these machines. One of the great things we built into the new Puppet server is a new instrumentation service. And this service helps you understand how your Puppet infrastructure itself is working. What's the capacity? What functions are being called too much? What functions aren't being called enough? Where is all the time going? Where is all the performance going? We've had customers who've had some pretty interesting problems that without this were very, very hard to debug. And in actuality, this service was built as a means of debugging a customer problem. We realized, oh, well, we got a support issue, it came in, tried to understand it, built this thing, installed it with the customer, and went, oh, well, there's your problem. So we had one customer who was doing a recursive file management on about 130,000 files, and that's slow but doable, but the problem is every time it sent a report up to the server, which was every half an hour on, I think it was 2,000 machines, it was including data for all 130,000 files in every report. And they were saying to us, look, it's completely broken. Our database fills up every day because it gets 7 or 12 gigabytes of data and it starts to be slow. And we looked into it. We said, with this kind of analysis, we were able to figure out pretty quickly, you're doing a lot of file management stuff. And they found that we all know that Puppet's recursive file management it's not ever going to be as fast as package management or rsync or things like that. That's not the goal. And so they realized that was the major problem, figured out a better way to solve that, problem goes away. We had another customer who had a function that the function itself took about 30 seconds to run, and then they called it about 30 or 50 times in every catalog compilation. They called us and said, look, Puppet is unusably slow, there's no way that we can use this in production. It takes 12 minutes to do anything. And over a long period of time, we figured out, oh, well, maybe if you just didn't call recursive YAML parsing quite so many times in this function, you would have a faster system. So the idea behind this console is both really well understand what's going on in your infrastructure, what's working, what's not working, and then also help you debug those problems, and then finally help you understand, do I need to look at increasing capacity? As I go from 200 servers to 1,000 servers to 2,000 servers to 5,000 servers, do I need to look at basically adding new machines to my compiler pool, adding new servers to my infrastructure? And in most cases, our average deployment we see in Puppet is about 250 to 500 nodes. In most cases, you don't have to worry about scaling your servers in that way. But as you start to multiply that by 10 or by 20 or 50, you start to have to worry about it. And then overall, we provide a great dashboard of what's going on in your infrastructure. For all the nodes that you have, how are they working? Are they succeeding? Are they failing? How many do you have? Overall, what's the snapshot? And then once you figure out what actually is going on, giving you great tools to help quickly figure out, what's the specific problem? If people have failed, how have they failed? Why have they failed? What is it affecting? Things like that. So if those of you who are already using Puppet, you already know a lot of these things. But if you're looking at adopting automation, and in a lot of cases it's automation overall. I think one of the things that's special about Puppet isn't that it is automation, it's that it's so easy to use, it's got such a large community, it's such a mature, stable product. That's what really makes it special. So let's say you're going to go all in on automation. Why would you do this? What does it mean to you? Well, what we found in the DevOps report was people who adopt the practices of DevOps, people who adopt the tooling of DevOps and automation, in general deploy code 30 times more frequently. And that's a very big difference, right? So you go from deploying once a year to deploying every week, or things like that. It's a really, really big difference. And it's not just about how fast you can deploy your code, right? It's about mean time to recovery. It's something that if you can only deploy once a year, it's got to be perfect. It's got to be right, because you don't get another chance. So you spend half of that time worrying about, is it exactly the right code? But if you can deploy once a week, or you can deploy once a day, then you go, look, I'm going to spend part of my time making sure it's right, but I know my mean time to recovery is so low that if there is a problem, I can just fix it right then. So you spend a lot less of your time doing kind of risk mitigation and a lot more of your time focusing on how to make your software better. And even with 30 times as many deployments, they had half as many failures. And I don't mean the percent of failure was half. I mean the total number of failures were lower, because this much investment in automation just has that big of a difference, that big of an impact. And then finally, and this was the surprising outcome for us, companies who successfully invest in automation, who successfully invest in DevOps, actually have a dramatically higher valuation in the market. The market values you more if technology is a competitive advantage for you. If technology is a core competency for you as a company, you do better as a company. And I think this is just as true for individuals. If you're a sysadmin and you think, my goal is to be better at the technology, my goal is to be at the leading edge, you're going to be valued more as a sysadmin. You're going to get more promotions, you're going to get higher pay raises, things like that. So it really does make a difference. We've seen Puppet is the fastest growing technology skill. This is a report out of Dice.com, which is a hiring site in the US. This report came out a couple weeks ago, and you can see it's growing faster than any other skill in the market, which we think is a testament to both the value of Puppet and the value of automation overall. And we've seen with our customers, we've seen very different but very large use cases. And is Pinterest at all used here in Australia? Anybody? Okay. No, apparently not. Pinterest is a modern web app that people use to basically they store pictures of things they would like to buy on the internet. And their usage curve is heavy usage at breakfast, heavy usage at lunch, heavy usage at dinner, and the rest of the time it's nearly dead. And so they save $300,000 a year by being able to match provisioning of servers with Puppet to their load curve, right? And 5 years ago, this would have been just about impossible, but today, with the kind of automation investments they've made, they were able to get a huge benefit from that. CERN got an award last week at the OpenStack Summit for the operations they were able to do around their Large Hadron Collider. They've got more than 100,000 servers under management with Puppet. And the amount of data that they're able to ingest and do good things with is just amazing. And Bank of America, and actually a lot of banks here in Australia, are also heavily utilizing Puppet both to manage their old brownfield infrastructure. How do we take the reality of accreting technology for decades and not lose it? Another word for legacy is production. So you don't want to just turn it all off, but how do we get control of it? And then also, how do we have the tools that allow us to move forward more quickly for all the new greenfield applications we have? So if you're interested in knowing more about Puppet, getting more involved in some way, the best place to start is to get involved in the community. Obviously, Puppet Camp like this is a great place to start. There are a lot of people who know Puppet very well, know automation very well, know the whole tool chain. This is a great place to meet them, to challenge them, call them wrong on the internet. It's fantastic. We have mailing lists, IRC channels. We have one of the largest and most active IRC. I think we're number 12 in the world on Freenode in terms of number of people in IRC. Our mailing lists are very active, and this is the strangest thing, very, very nice. We've got our Q&A site. There are places where you can go and help fix bugs. There's so many ways to get involved in the community and in the product. We've got a ton of education online, so whether you want to do a 3-day course in person, whether you want to do a series of 5-minute courses, whether you want to do all self-guided learning, whether you want to go look at our docs are some of the best in the world. We've got a huge amount of information. It's very well written, it's very well maintained, and actually one of the reasons Puppet docs are so great is James Turnbull, who's from Australia, called me a long time. He didn't call me because people don't call each other, but he emailed me a long time ago and said, hey, I'm going to write a Puppet book. And I said, well, I was going to write a Puppet book. And they went, no, I wasn't going to write a Puppet book. That sounds great. I'll help you as long as you actually update our documentation with everything, every question you ask me, I'll answer, but then you have to go update the docs. And James ended up being responsible for all of our docs, and that was the kernel of us having great docs. But here we are 5-6 years later, and we've just got a huge investment, and it's worked out really well. We do have a ton of in-person training, and as was mentioned, Brett has done a bunch of training here in town, and we're doing a training I think we must have just finished this week. Also, we work hard to get feedback from you on our products themselves. So we have a test pilots program for products either we've just released or we're in the process of releasing. So we can try to figure out, are we being stupid, right? Hey, when you hold this, does it cut your hand? When you try to use this, what happens? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Does it actually solve your problem? We think it's really cool, but we'd hate to release it and have you go, yeah, this is really interesting, but it gave me an STD and then also set my servers on fire. So we want to try to figure those things out at least as quickly as possible and preferably before release. So please come participate in that program. And then, as always, we are hiring. I think joining Puppet Labs especially in our field teams, people who are doing the technical solutions engineering and professional services engineering, it's not easy work. You will become elite on an airline very, very quickly, and you'll become a master at packing and things like that. But you get so much opportunity to meet so many people who are doing so many interesting things. It really is, it's a challenging job, but it's a fantastic job. And it's actually how I started. Before I started Puppet Labs, I was a consultant, and then in the first 3 years of the company, I was the marketing person and the salesperson and the programmer and the tester and the services person and the sales engineer. And the work of teaching so many people how to use Puppet, of teaching so many people how to do automation, taught me so much about what it takes to build a great tool, what it takes not to build something that I can use, or that one of you can use, or three of you can use, to build something that all of you can use. So you get a much broader view of what the overall market looks like. So it really is a great career move, because you just learn so much so quickly about the market. And lastly, I think it's worth noting, we're not done. I think we're so early in this process. I think we're on about step 2 out of 20, maybe 3 out of 20 in building fully automated infrastructure and building the best tools. If you look around you today and you say, the tools we have, I think they're basically good enough. No way. There's so much more to do. There's so much more change coming. So on the one hand, don't get too comfortable. But on the other hand, I think it's going to be a really interesting ride. So thank you very much. And I think we have a little time for questions. So Dawn's got a mic she'll bring to you, or I can also just repeat the question so everyone else can hear it. Either way.
Oh, right in the middle?
I can probably yell.
Yeah, repeat it.
You were talking about SaaS products and basically that being the way of the future in terms of some of those bits and pieces. I've got customers always asking me about an online service for Puppet and not having to maintain the master. Yep. Is that something that's on the roadmap?
Yeah, so the question is people asking about a hosted version of Puppet so they don't have to maintain it themselves. It is in the roadmap. It's never been as high a priority because for a couple of reasons. And the biggest one is we've seen pretty consistently people want to have their management with their infrastructure. And it might be that our customer base tends towards larger companies, and so we have a bias in who we're working with. But pretty consistently when we've looked at where SaaS should fit in our listed investments, it's always been pretty low. Because we go and say, hey, here are these 5 things we should work on. We go talk to all of our customers or all of our prospects and say, where do these priorities fit in terms of what you care about? And SaaS is always either not on the list at all or 3 or 4 on the list instead of first or second. So I really hope we're going to make real progress on it in 2015. But if I had to give up the things that are above it to do it, I wouldn't get there. And if you look at things like, Opscode Chef invested in SaaS really early on, and they had to change their strategy entirely because not that there were no users of it, but it wasn't driving the majority of their business. So I look at things like that. For us, it's a when, not an if. We know we're going to have a significant SaaS investment. We know it's going to be a critical part of it. What I expect us to do as an interim, or not as an interim, but as the path to get there, is there are some services that make more sense in SaaS. So like data aggregation, taking all the logs, taking all the reporting, those things we can give you more value more quickly with SaaS. Whereas asking you to put all your code online, and asking you to put all of your key secrets online, those are going to be harder to convince as many people to move forward. So I do hope we have something soon, but that at least explains why it hasn't been as big a priority. Question there?
Yeah, you were saying you wanted to move towards C++ for the client, for factors and things. Are you afraid that it's going to actually lower the number of contribution to your code? Because for instance, I see myself, it's much easier for me to understand what Ruby does and to commit my own pull request to your code and all, and I actually did it several times. But in C++, I haven't done C++ in 15 years. I wouldn't even know where to start.
Yeah, so the question is the move towards C++ and Clojure from Ruby, are we concerned about it reducing the contributions from the community? Certainly to some extent, right? It will obviously change the list of people and the kind of people who contribute. We're doing a lot of things to mitigate this concern though. So the reality is, first, the majority of the community, the majority of people don't contribute in the core. If you look at Factor, if you look at Puppet, almost all the contributions from outside of Puppet Labs, right? So 97%, 98% of all of the code in all of these projects I mentioned today is written by Puppet Labs employees. So they actually have to go learn C++ if I tell them to. So in that case, I'm not worried about that.
I am.
Yeah, well, suck it up. Where people tend to contribute is at the edge. So if you're talking about factors, people contribute new facts, they contribute modifications to facts. Hey, this doesn't work quite as well as I wanted to in AWS. If you look at Puppet, people are contributing types, providers, plugins. As part of this transition, we're making all the plugins, not necessarily all of them, but the majority of the plugins will not be converted into C++. So Factor, as an example, earlier this year, we released a version of Factor that supports external facts. So rather than Ruby plugins, you have plugins that are either literally you just drop some YAML in a directory, or you drop some JSON in a directory, or you put a shell script or a Perl script or a Ruby script into a directory, and rather than that being a plugin against an API, Factor just executes that directly, gets the data back. So that's a way for you're still able to do the work you want to do. I want to add functionality into the system, I want to write a plugin. But it's not just that it's easier, you don't have to learn C++. It's actually easier, you don't have to learn anything, right? If you're a shell person, you can do it in shell. If you're a Ruby person, you do it in Ruby. If you're a Python person, you do it in Python. Puppet, we haven't done that work yet in Puppet, but we have the same goals. We want to get to the point where things like providers, they aren't written in Ruby, they aren't written in C++. They're written in whatever the heck you feel like writing them in, and we just have a sufficiently defined API that, or an execution interface that you know, hey, I just have to do this and then it'll work. So I actually think the discipline that we'll have to adopt to make this work will make your lives actually much easier as a means of contributions. And I think also, while the number of traditional sysadmins who are going to contribute to that core is going to probably go down a little bit, I think the number of more traditional engineers who will contribute as a result, because, and part of it is, frankly, a lot of the original code that I wrote is still there, which means it's horrible and unmaintainable. So going through this process of gradually one chunk at a time, rewriting it, you get higher quality code, you get more kind of traditional modern code, and you get something that an average developer can walk in the door and make a significant change to because it's well architected and things like that. I think it'll actually increase contributions overall, but a big part of it is making sure that at the edge, where nearly all of our community contributions happen, that is at least as easy and probably much easier to contribute. Maybe one last question, I think, in the back.
Speaking about the already care about what state you want the system to be, and doesn't care about what system is, what state it is at the moment. But probably you care about what the history of the state of the system can be. So is there any built-in functionality where we can review the history of the state?
Yeah, so the question is, given that Puppet is concerned about the desired state and not really about the current state, is there a way to figure out the historical state of the service? If you're using PuppetDB, then you do have reports saying, here are all the changes that have happened to the system. We don't currently just store all the catalogs going back, so you don't get an historic catalog view that you can then map to each of the individual reports. But if you've been using Puppet for a month or 3 months, then you have 3 months worth of data saying, here are all the changes I made to the system. There are tools today, tools like ScriptRock, that you can go through and do snapshots of machines on a regular basis and get that historical view. But Puppet by default right now, and it's possible to build something that does this, it's just the default workflow and usage of Puppet doesn't do this today. Doesn't do snapshots of unmanaged resources and tell you, here's how they're changing over time. No, you can't roll back, and this is actually an interesting / painful philosophical argument we have internally all the time. Is rollback, magic fairy dust myth, or is it something that kind of is sufficiently realistic that we should tell customers to do it? In general, when people are worried about rollback, they really want to roll forward. So if obviously you're version controlling your configurations, and if you're not, then rollback is crazy talk. So you're version controlling your configurations, you make a change you didn't want. Most people, what they prefer to do is convert to the old configuration, roll out that new / old configuration, which reverts the change. So that's how most people do rollback in this world, because The reality is you can't really roll back in most cases. So that's kind of the closest thing we get to roll back today. And I think that's it for time. Okay, one more question. Steve?
Hello. I know that the next question I'm going to ask is not specifically around Puppet, and it's quite a big area. But I'm just wondering if you guys are going to maybe publish a few guidelines on how to put together a working CD pattern.
Are we going to publish guidelines on how to put together a working continuous delivery pattern? Well, one of our product managers is focused today on what the tool chain and best practice is for, it's not quite continuous delivery, but how can you, what are the slots and gaps in getting from your keyboard into production, and what tools already exist? What practices do you have to develop? Because in a lot of cases, it's much more about process than technology. There are 5 kinds of technology, but if you refuse to develop discipline, then you're going to be screwed no matter what you do. I don't think his goal is really about building a white paper per se, or about building a, here is a generalized best practice. And it's much more about, if you are a Puppet user who has adopted this tool chain overall, here's what else you need to adopt, and here are the processes you need to adopt to make this work. But again, his focus is building a product, not building a white paper. We're very much technology companies, and not at all. Almost all the consulting we do is very tactical. Like, here's how to get your team to adopt the product. Here's how to solve the 5 most important problems in your infrastructure. So in general, you're not going to see from us, at least, white papers describing generally here's how to do something, and instead you're going to see here's a product, here's how to use it. Here's a product, here's how to use it. So I doubt you'll see quite something like that from us, but you will see the product overall, and then a ton of ridiculously good documentation about how to use that product in reality. So thank you very much. I hope you have a great day at Puppet Camp, and thanks for coming.